episode of the Good Rum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so today's episode of the show, it's not, you can argue it's not really that unusual. I was probably making more of it than there was. It's a rum episode of the show. I think what the interesting thing about today's episode of the show is probably more the context, and what the samples that I have. They're obviously a selection of independently bottled rums. Some of the samples are quite old in actual fact. The Dewar, Rattray and Moran McDavid samples date from way back when, and obviously the Kill Devil samples are fairly recent. I think they were bottled November-ish, I think, of last year. But so the interesting thing to me is, like I said, it's the context. It's the fact that if you go back about 10 years, independent bottling companies weren't really bottling rum at all. In actual fact, I remember having a conversation with Francis from Dewar Rattray, or AD Rattray as they're now called, back in about, I think it was 2009, and they decided that they were going to bottle their first ever cask of rum and sent a sample out at cask strength, and I spoke to her and said, "You've got to bottle at cask strength, this is absolutely stunning stuff." And she said, "Well, I've spoken to other customers and the general consensus is we'll bottle it at 46%, which they duly did, and it was okay at 46%, nothing wrong with it. And then when they came to do their second one, we had exactly the same conversation. And again, she said, "Well, we're going to bottle it at 46%. And I said, "Well, have you bottled it yet?" And the answer was no. And I said, "Look, can you bottle a dozen bottles for me at cask strength?" Which they duly did. And as far as I'm aware, this is the only remaining bottle of that 12. Now on the label it basically said it's a 13-year-old Caroni Trinidad, distilled in 1997, and on the label it basically said 372 bottles, which technically they probably were if they'd all been bottled at 46%. But like I said, this, as far as I'm aware, is the only bottling in the world remaining of this 13-year-old cask strength Caroni. And it's bloody good. And unfortunately I don't have a sample, so I can't really include it in today's episode of the show. But I've got a couple of other bottlings of from AD Rattray from way back in the midst of time, when they were regularly bottling stuff for the UK market as opposed to everything being sold to the continent and Germany, and specifically, but we won't get into that because that's a conversation for another day, isn't it? But anyway, so lots of interesting distilleries, stills. I mean, as you know, one of the curious things about rum is that it's not necessarily keyed to the actual distillery, but to the still. And a case in point being that these stills tend to move around. I mean, obviously the Diamond Distillery in Guyana is the most well known of these kind of collections of stills. And so obviously if you have that still, you can call your rum that still. You don't have to necessarily say the name of the distillery it came from, it's just distilled in that still. So we have some interesting stuff, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I did some research, and a few of these rums are, I've never tasted rums from Belize, for example, or I think I've tasted them from everywhere else, but Belize was certainly a new one on me. But anyway, so what I'll do is I'll obviously talk a little bit about each bottling as I introduce them, which I think I'll do now. Okay, so we're going to kick off with an 11-year-old Guadalupe Rum. This was bottled in Moran McDavid's Renegade Rum series. It was distilled in 1998 and bottled in 2010, believe it or not, thus making it 11 years old, and finished in Chateau Latour casks. I mean, I remember the Renegade Rum range, and there were some absolutely stunning rums were bottled in it, and I love the opaque sort of glass bottles that they came in. Now, the Gardel distillery is obviously in Guadeloupe, which is part of the French West Indies. So the Gardel distillery, not a huge amount of information about it. A lot of these sort of distilleries have obviously their own range, and their websites just tend to sort of a little bit of history, maybe not very much, and more about their range of rums. But so basically, it was opened in 1870, and like I said, pretty much all rum distilleries going back to sort of the 1900s tended to be, or certainly the early 1900s, tended to be part of a plantation. They weren't actually distilleries in their own right per se, if you see what I mean. So this was obviously part of the Gardel plantation, and it produces cane sugar obviously from cane. It makes molasses, it makes rum, and this is, can't remember off the top of my head if it was a single cask bottling or not, but it was certainly a small batch. So that's the kicking off point. A bit of an odd one to kick off with a rum, a wine cask finish, but it is relatively the youngest-ish one we're going to be looking at. Right, the second bottling we'll be looking at is an 11-year-old from Belize. This is distilled at the Travellers Distillery, or Travellers Liqueurs Limited as the company is known. It's part of obviously the Kill Devil range. It was distilled in 2005, November 2005, bottled tail end of 2017. It's 11 years old, bottled at 46%. The distillery itself was founded in 1953 and produces a range of spirits, not only rum. I think it also does gin, vodka and brandy, but obviously it's the rum that we're interested in today, which is produced from molasses, naturally fermented, and distilled in a triple column still, so it should be quite interesting. The third bottling we'll be looking at, again, another Kill Devil bottling. It is a Venezuelan rum from the Cacsa distillery, distilled in 2004, March 2004, and again bottled in late 2017 at 13 years of age at 46%. And could I find any information whatsoever about this particular distillery? No. It is a complete mystery. I don't even know if it's actually an acronym, CACSA, or whether it's Cacsa, but I couldn't find absolutely nothing about it whatsoever. So we're just going to taste it. Obviously, the most well-known distillery in Venezuela is the Diplomatico, or the Distillerius Unidas. Yeah, okay, I probably murdered that pronunciation, but anyways, let's move on. We'll just ignore that. To the first of the two AD Rattray bottlings from back in the midst of time. This is another Venezuelan rum from Pampero. It was distilled in 1992, bottled in 2011 at 47%. Yeah, okay, not quite 46, but well. They obviously decided to go with that. Pampero, or Industrious Pampero, was founded in 1938 by a chap called Alejandro Fernandez and Luis Toro. Was then sold to United Distillers in 1991 for 45 million quid. Not bad, if you ask me. So now obviously United Distillers going to Diageo, and they have a range. Don't know whether Diageo really pushes it or not. I don't think it does, to be honest with you. It has a number of stills, kettle stills, or batch kettle stills. It has pot still and column still. Don't know how many of each of them it has, but it has the 3 different types of stills. Their rum can be pretty much triple distilled. They're obviously a bit like some of the other distilleries like Diamond Distillery and what have you, where they initially distill and then decide on how light or heavy they want the next rum. So you've then got obviously the choice of stills. You can distill it once, twice, more, however many times you actually want to. So I think it's difficult to say what this one is particularly distilled from, or in, I should say rather. I mean, we know it's sugar cane, so it's going to have a sort of, I'm guessing, a slight agricole note. But it's been donkey years since I actually last tasted this, so could be quite interesting. The second of the two AD Rattray bottlings was finally a cask strength bottling. It was bottled at 58.8%, although I think it was bottled eventually at 46%. Yes, I think it was. Yeah. So no, it wasn't bottled at cask strength. talking rubbish. So it's a Guyanan from the Port Morant. Now, obviously not from the Port Morant distillery itself, because the Port Morant distillery closed in 1880. So it wouldn't have come from that distillery. And of course, as we know, the Port Morant, the double wooden pot still, first off ended up at Guyana's other distillery, Enmore, before that closed, and then everything ended up at the Diamond Distillery. So this was obviously distilled at the Diamond Distillery in 1992, bottled in November of 2009. So this actually could be their first, the AD Rattray's first rum bottling. I can't remember exactly. I probably should have checked that one out, but certainly I think around 2009 was when they first started the odd single cask rum bottling. So this was 17 years old, and the last bottling we'll be looking at is again in the Kill Devil range. It's from Guadeloupe, the Bellevue distillery, distilled in March of 1998, bottled in 2017, 19 years old at 59.7, and the distillery itself is quite interesting. It was opened around about tail end of the 19th century, and bought in 1942 by the Damoiseau family. So the distillery is technically now Distillery Damoiseau Belleville, or Bellevue I should say. The rum is made from sugarcane juice, so again, because the French Indies or the French islands have a tendency to do the agricoles, not all of them obviously, but this is obviously going to be an agricole. Fermentation time for the wort is about 36 hours, so pretty short in actual fact, well, very short in actual fact. It's then distilled in a copper and stainless steel single column to 72% ABV, cut then to 50%, and then put in casks. So this is obviously bottled at higher than 50% in actual fact, so one assumes it's obviously the ABV is increased through the reduction of the water element, and because it's bottled at 59.7, so unless somebody slipped up and casked it at 60%, that's going to be the reason why it is bottled at that percentage. So there you go. That's quite an awful lot of waffle, and I hope I haven't bored you with that, and I hope you haven't fallen asleep. So I think it's probably back time we actually tasted these. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the 11-year-old Guadalupe. This is the 11-year-old finished in ex-Chateau Lecoeur casks. There is an agricole kind of character to the nose. It's got that sort of sweet sort of menthol, dried fruit, raisins. The cask kind of sits at the edge, and this is the thing that I found with a lot of the rums that were finished in red wine casks. The red wine doesn't really impinge very much upon the rum itself, because the rum is so strongly flavoured, generally speaking, that it kind of just sort of sits right at the edges. You get a little bit of a red fruity kind of note. That's a lovely depth to it, has to be said. It's got, you know, a good freshness. Getting a little bit of coffee powder, a little bit of tobacco, some earth as well. Yeah, that's kind of opening up really, really nicely, and I'm pretty certain this was one of the ones that we stocked years ago. But yeah, getting a little bit more of the sort of red berry fruit now coming out as well. So lovely, really nice nose. Let's see what the palate's like. That's a chewy, tobacco-y kind of finish. A little bit of treacle. Again, it kind of opens up with a lovely combination of the finishing cask, the slight red fruits, and then quickly coming in the agricole, the menthol, the medicinal notes of the sugarcane juice. And like I say, it's got a lovely finish, a real sort of earthy and dusty and tobacco-y and slightly leathery and spicy, and damn, that's good. That's lovely stuff. I mean, I love agricole rums. I love that kind of medicinal intensity. It's kind of, they're like the peated malts. You're either going to kind of love that style or you're not. But I think this is certainly quite heavy agricole malt rum. It has the sweetness to kind of like balance it up, you know, that has a sort of, like I said, a little bit of treacly sweetness, and also the sort of the winey sweetness as well. So I think all told, I think that was a very, very successful bottling. Okay, so let's move on to the 11-year-old Belize Rum. What's the plural of Belize? Belizean, possibly? I don't know. Anyway, let's see what the rum's like. To me, it said obvious column still. I didn't realise it at the time when I first tasted it, but it's got that light, high-toned, almost kind of grain whiskey-like kind of dried fruit. There's a lot of oak, a lot of American oak, so you're getting a lot of vanilla, a lot of coconut. It's got a slight tropicalness. I mean, it's a lovely rum. It really is. It's really quite pleasant, you know, and it's got some level of complexity for a young rum, but essentially it is kind of pretty much kind of light column still, dried fruits and lots of oak. But you know, kind of, it works. It's good rum, you know. Huh. Let's see what the palate's like. Quite fruit sweet, dried sweet fruit, loads of coconut. I mean, the coconut just kind of continues right the way through. It kind of opens up with a lot of oak. Again, the spirit is very light. It's got a little bit of dried fruit, and it kind of like the oak is very, very dominant. I mean, it's not overly dominant, but it is dominant, if you see what I mean. I personally, I mean, it's a nice rum, but when I had all the samples and I tasted through them, it was, you know, and I had to obviously make a decision as to what I was going to order at the time of receiving the samples. That one was one that I decided I wasn't going to go for, not because of the quality, but because there were other ones that I preferred more, shall we say. But in saying that, it is a nice rum. Just for me, a little bit too heavy on the oak, but yeah, still can't knock the quality. Right, okay, so let's move on to the unknown. Well, it is known, Cacsa, the distillery, but you know, the distillery that does not seem to exist. Anyway, let's see what the nose goes. Quite heavy. I would guess probably molasses based spirit. It certainly has that heaviness. It's got a slight kind of citric astringency. It's almost kind of becoming a slightly vinegary, not in an off way, in a sort of like an astringent kind of way, and it's unusual. It is a sort of almost kind of malt vinegar like kind of note. I mean, some people might see that as a fault. I mean, yeah, I suppose you probably could argue it is, but yeah, it kind of works. You know, you've got the heavy sort of licorice, dried fruit, spices. I mean, it's a dense rum, it has to be said, and it doesn't give an absolutely huge amount away on the nose, but it's certainly interesting. Yeah. Let's see what the palate gives us. Lots of rich herbal, almost oloroso-y, herbally dried fruit to kick off with, and it's possible, judging from the colour, that it may well have been aged in or this may well be an ex-oloroso cask. Again, it's got that slightly funky mid-palate with the slightly acerbic, kind of astringent green fruit and vinegar and citrus, which kind of really just kind of cleans up the palate, and it does make it a little bit austere on the finish. There is a little bit of kind of almost kind of minerality and grippy spice and citrus on the finish. It's an unusual rum, it has to be said. I can't say that I've ever really tasted a rum quite like it. Whether it's really commercial, this was the issue I had when I was evaluating it. I loved it, I mean, because it's kind of a bit weird and wacky and funky, but the trouble is a lot of rum drinkers are, shall we say, slightly more conservative. This is why El Dorado, Diplomatico are probably the two biggest selling ranges that we do, because I wouldn't say they're straightforward, because they are incredibly complex, and I've done episodes of the show on both of them and I love both of them, but they are very approachable, you know. I mean, obviously the sweetness of Diplomatico kind of like helps, because people have a general sweet tooth, and don't tend, unless you're really into your rums, you know, you don't tend to sort of search out the more funky, weird kind of ones. You know, you go with, you know, the things that you kind of like. And that was the issue I kind of had with this particular bottling. It's really interesting because it's got so much weird stuff going on. But whether I could have sold that or not, of course, is another matter. But anyway, like I said, sort of really, really interesting. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Rattray Pampero, 18 years old. Let's see what the nose gives. Yeah, it's a lovely nose. I remember, I think, you know, we stocked this particular one. It seems to me certainly it's a molasses-based rum. Has lots of dried fruit, some licorice, some tar. Again, slightly herbal in the sort of, you know, more oloroso-y sort of herbal kind of character, as opposed to the sort of mentholated agricole kind of character. Touch of wood smoke. Really complex, lovely, lovely rum. Nice sweetness, balanced, touch of acidity, well, sort of citrusy acidity. Yeah, that is a fabulously balanced rum. And it's getting really smoky now as it kind of opens up in a sort of kind of wood stroke coal smoke. Oops, over demonstrative there. Yeah, so it's. We'll go back to the beginning. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Pampero. This is obviously 18 years old, bottled at 40, oh, for fuck's sake. Okay, so let's move on to the AD Rattray, or Dear Rattray Pampero, 18 years old, bottled at 46%, 47%. God, get it right, come on. That's a lovely nose. And I remember stocking this, and oh, it's still a damn good good nose. It's rich, it's molasses based, dark honey, licorice, treacle, quite smoky in actual fact. I'm getting wood smoke, you know, that sort of almost kind of, no, yeah, it is wood smoke. It's not coal, it's not tar or peat or anything like that. It's definitely wood smoke. Dried fruit, loads of it in the sort of the more darker kind of raisinated kind of end of the dried fruit spectrum. Really fabulously balanced and oh, stunning, absolutely stunning. This is a lovely, lovely rum, it has to be said. Nice sweetness to the fruit as well. A little bit of herbalness, more in the sort of kind of, I suppose, oloroso-y kind of herbal notes, as opposed to medicinal agricole herbal notes. Although I don't think this is obviously an oloroso cask, but it has that lovely, lovely richness to it, and So little bit of coconut kind of coming through as well. That's really complex, and that's stood up. I mean, that was bottled in 2011, so we're talking sort of 7 years. That little bit has been kind of sat in that bottle, and it's still bloody amazingly good. No sign of degradation at all there. Anyway, let's see what the palate is. Oh, definitely cigar boxes on the finish. I'm getting cedar and cigar leaf and pepper. That's a really interesting palate, because it's kind of not as dark and heavy as the nose would kind of suggest. It's a lot lighter. The dried fruit is more in the sultanery kind of end of the dried fruit spectrum as opposed to the raisin end of the spectrum. There's a little bit of almost kind of crystallized violet. There's some herbal notes, lighter, almost kind of dried tropical fruit, touch of coconut, and again, like I said, that finish is just like cigar boxes, cedar, and wow, that has held up amazingly well. That was obviously one of the concerns I had, obviously a sample of that kind of age, and obviously the next one being even older than that, so I'm hoping that's, probably should have smelt it before I did the episode show, but we'll just wing it. Okay, so let's move on to the Port Morant. So as I said, this is a 17-year-old. The sample here is at 58.8%, but obviously the final bottling was at 46%. But let's see one of those gives us. Oh, that's a pungent nose. Classic kind of oily Guyana, sort of green bananas. I mean, this just says kind of, this is Guyana rum to me, and I mean, like I said, it's got that sort of oiliness, that sort of it's proper rum, if you see what I mean. Maybe there's a little bit of earthiness. There's some lovely sweet fruit kind of coming through now. Some apricot, citrus, sort of almost kind of melon, papaya kind of tropical fruit, but it's all sort of like just sitting sort of slightly back. There's a slight agricole kind of herbal note kind of coming through. It's not as woody as I would expect actually from, I mean, the last time I tasted, I think it was when I did the El Dorado tasting, the sort of the double wooden pot still, the sort of the wooden stills seem to sort of give quite a woody kind of character, and I'm not getting a huge amount of it on this. There's a bit of roasted peanut possibly, which I'm guessing is probably coming from the oak. Some lime. I mean, this is a fantastic rum. It is absolutely stunning. And I wish Rattray would bottle some more bloody good rums, because they did do some wonderful rums. And like I said, the stuff that they sent me sample-wise for, just before Christmas that they'd bottled for the UK market was, anyway. Anyway, going back to this is lovely. I'm getting a bit of almost kind of roasted banana now. It's just kind of every time I'm sticking my nose in here, I'm getting a different kind of aroma coming up, and this is just bloody good. Let's see what the palate is. Well, I tell you what, it doesn't feel like 18. It's herbal, it's pungent, it's oily, it's classic Guyanan, dried sort of green banana, licorice root in actual fact, I would say, more than anything else. A little bit of spice, a little bit of herbs, but you know, that green kind of citric fruit kind of character, and maybe green melon as well. It's a bit drying on the finish because obviously that's the alcohol, and it does kind of accentuate the sort of wood spice and a little bit of vanilla as well. And I would have personally bottled it at cask strength, so you could have added that little bit of, you know, water if you wanted to. Obviously didn't have enough of the sample remaining to do so, but fabulous at cask strength, that has to be said. And I remember stocking this, and you know, it was fabulous when it was diluted as well. So oh, that's a lovely one. And finally we're on to the Kill Devil Bellevue. This is obviously 19 years old and 59.7. Right, let's see when those goes. Do you know, for something that's this high ABV, you would not guess it. And for a column still rum, yes, there is a sort of a column still kind of edge to it, but it's got quite a rich, dense character. This is, like I said, this is the thing with column stills. You don't always naturally assume that a column still rum is going to be light and fruity and elegant and delicate and all that kind of stuff. You just take out a handful of plates and you can create quite a heavy, rich spirit. And this has got a lovely richness to it. You know, good weight. There's a little bit of kind of medicinal agricole note kind of coming through. Actually, more than a little bit. It's actually becoming quite agricole, but this is what I kind of remember about the Venezuelan rums. They do tend to sort of balance up quite nicely. They have both molassy kind of character and kind of the sort of agricole character, and they kind of seem to be a kind of a hybrid, I suppose. And so if you're used to sort of like, you know, the molasses based rums, Jamaican, that kind of thing, you know, Venezuelan is a good kind of stopping off point before you go into sort of like, you know, things like Haitian or you know, some of the other, you know, styles of you know, the French styles, the agricoles. And this certainly has elements of both, and it's really intriguing. Yeah, sort of lovely rounded fruit. Yeah, that's lovely rum, and I actually bought some, and we have some in stock, funnily enough, because I think this is absolutely sensational stuff. Really, very, very good. Let's see what the palate's like. Oh, that's a big rum. That's a weighty, kind of fruity, treacly, molassy, kind of dark, intense, loads of spicy fruit. Again, that little bit of agricole note kind of just coming through, that little slightly medicinal note. Some lovely mouth-watering citrus, and again, you would not have thought that was nearly 60%. I mean, it is just so easy to drink at that ABV, which is a bit damn dangerous, it has to be said. Yes, the spices on the finish were obviously slightly amplified by the alcohol, but oh, that's so soft and slightly violety and sort of treacly and rich and dark and oh, that's good. You really need to buy a bottle of that. Okay, time to rather quickly wrap this episode of the show up before the battery goes. So we kicked off obviously with a very old Renegade rum from Moran, McDavid, which is very, very good. And like I say, really interesting how kind of rums worked with the wine cask, and they just stand up to it so well. And you know, although Moran and McDavid at the time were hell-bent on finishing every damn thing in a wine cask, certain casks worked and certain things didn't, and this was certainly one that did. The Belize Travellers, yeah, okay, got no issue with that. It was a kind of classic light, high-toned column still rum, a little bit heavy on the oak, but you know, interesting. The Venezuela, again, you know, interesting in that kind of funky, weird kind of, you know, we've got some strange it's kind of happening here and it's not for everybody, and some people might go, oh my god, what the hell that's all about. But I kind of liked it because I like it a little bit weird and wonderful, it has to be said. The Pampero, absolutely stunning, lovely rum, and like I said, I wish AD Rattray would bottle some more rum like this. You know, there's bloody great quality that they were doing. I wish they'd bottle some more bloody good stuff for the UK market, it has to be said, as opposed to all this young sherry cask finished stuff that they thought they might chuck out for the UK market. Ooh, I'm being a bit harsh there, aren't I? The Port Morant, lovely rum, classic Guyanan rum. I think sort of Guyanan rum was probably the first rum that I was actually introduced to, and I just loved that kind of sort of oily, natural character. It's not a sort of a character that everybody is going to sort of like appreciate. Certainly if you drink, I don't know, sort of Jamaican rums, that sort of broad kind of fruity rums, or sort of Diplomatica or something like that. This is kind of way out of your comfort zone, and I think you ought to try it, because it's kind of like then a lead in, like I said, to the agricoles, or you could, you know, go with the Guadalupe, which is sort of like, you know, the hybrid, if you like, for want of a better word, sort of stepping stone for me between the molasses-based rums and the agricoles. But you know, this is the wonderful thing about rum. There are so many different styles: column stills, pot stills, kettle stills, etc., etc. You know, sugarcane juice, molasses, sugarcane honey, whatever. You know, there's always going to be a rum out there that's going to be you know, the right one for you. So anyway, obviously the older bottlings that I've tasted today are obviously no longer available, but certainly the Kill Devil ones are definitely available, and like I said, the Guadalupe one is on the Gauntlet's website. So if that kind of sounds like your cup of tea or bottle of rum, as the case may be, then pop along and pick yourself up a bottle. Aside from that, next week I think we're heading over to Ireland next week, in actual fact, and should be a really interesting tasting, I think. And you know, all the controversy with the Irish whiskey and all that. But anyway, I better wrap this up pretty quickly as the battery's about to die. So until then, good dramming and good afternoon.